Class, welcome back. We are going to finish chapter 10 today in the narrative and life of Frederick Douglass. We left off reading about he's made the decision this year is not going to pass without trying to escape. He has a couple slaves along with him that want to go as well. And he just got done talking about whether they choose to stay in slavery or choose to try and escape. It is super dangerous either way. There's death. A horrible, awful death is a very real possibility. And he just got done saying it's quite often that people just stay in a really bad situation because at least they know that bad situation and the unknown could be worse. And so that unknown is just as scary or even more scary. All right, so we're on page 51. Sandy, one of our number, gave up the notion, but still encouraged us. So he decides he's not going to try and escape with them. Our company then consisted of Henry Harris, John Harris, Henry Bailey, Charles Roberts, and myself. Henry Bailey was my uncle and belonged to my master. Charles married my aunt. He belonged to my master's father-in-law, Mr. William Hamilton. The plan we finally concluded was was to get a large canoe belonging to Mr. Hamilton, and upon the Saturday night previous to Easter holidays, paddle directly up the Chesapeake Bay. On our arrival at the head of the bay, a distance of 70 or 80 miles from where we lived, it was our purpose to turn our canoe adrift and follow the guidance of the North Star till we got beyond the limits of Maryland. Our reason for taking the water route was that we were less liable to be suspected as runaways. We hoped to be regarded as fishermen, whereas if we should take the land route, we should be subjected to interruptions of almost every kind. Anyone having a white face and being so disposed could stop us and subject us to examination. The week before our intended start, I wrote several protections, one for each of us. As well as I can remember, they were in the following words, to wit, "This is to certify that I, the undersigned, have given the bearer, my servant, full liberty to go to Baltimore and spend the Easter holidays, written with mine own hand, and etc., 1835, William Hamilton, near St. Michael's in Talbot County, Maryland." So this is a pass. It'd be written on a piece of paper. Slaves were sometimes given a pass. Yes, you're still a slave. I still own you, but you can, for a certain amount of time, go to a certain place. And then if any white person says, "Hey, where's your pass?" you show them this. Okay, that's why it was so important for Douglass to learn to write. We were not going to Baltimore, but in going up the bay, we went toward Baltimore, and these protections were only intended to protect us while on the bay. As the time drew near for our departure, our anxiety became more and more intense. It was truly a matter of life and death with us. The strength of our determination was about to be fully tested. At this time, I was very active in explaining every difficulty, removing every doubt, dispelling every fear, and inspiring all with the firmness indispensable to success in our undertaking. Assuring them that half was gained the instant we made the move. We had talked long enough. We were now ready to move. If not now, we never should be. And if we did not intend to move now, we had as well fold our arms, sit down, and acknowledge ourselves fit only to be slaves. This none of us were prepared to acknowledge. Every man stood firm. And at our last meeting, we pledged ourselves afresh in the most solemn or serious manner that at the time appointed, we would certainly start in pursuit of freedom. This was in the middle of the week, at the end of which we were to be off. We went, as usual, to our several fields of labor, but with bosoms highly agitated with thoughts of our truly hazardous undertaking. Your bosom is your chest. So, when you feel anxious and nervous, you kind of feel it in your chest, almost like a pressure. And that's what they're feeling. They're nervous about this escape. We tried to conceal our feelings as much as possible, and I think we succeeded very well. After a painful waiting, the Saturday morning, whose night was to witness our departure, came. I hailed it with joy, bring what of sadness it might. Friday night was a sleepless one for me. I probably felt more anxious than the rest because I was, by common consent, at the head of the whole affair. So he's the leader. The responsibility of success or failure lay heavily upon me. The glory of the one and the confusion of the other were alike mine. The first 2 hours of that morning were such as I never experienced before, and hope never to again. Early in the morning we went, as usual, to the field. We were spreading manure, and all at once, While thus engaged, I was overwhelmed with an indescribable feeling, in the fullness of which I turned to Sandy, who was nearby, and said, "We are betrayed." "Well," said he, "that thought has this moment struck me." We said no more. I was never more certain of anything. So we're not told why, but Douglas just gets this sudden feeling that someone has ratted us out. Someone's told on us. Our plan is known. We've been betrayed. And Sandy says, even though Sandy's not going with them, he says that he feels the same thing. The horn was blown as usual, and we went up from the field to the house for breakfast. I went for the form more than for want of anything to eat that morning. Just as I got to the house, and looking out at the lane gate, I saw 4 white men with 2 colored men. The white men were on horseback, and the colored ones were walking behind as if tied. I watched them a few moments till they got up to the lane gate. Here they halted and tied the colored men to the gate post. I was not yet certain as to what the matter was. In a few moments, in rode Mr. Hamilton with a speed betokening great excitement. He came to the door and inquired if Master William was in. He was told he was at the barn. Mr. Hamilton, without dismounting, rode up to the barn with extraordinary speed. In a few moments, he and Mr. Freeland returned to the house. By this time, the 3 constables or policemen rode up, and in great haste dismounted, tied their horses, and met Master William and Mr. Hamilton returning from the barn. And after talking a while, they all walked up to the kitchen door. There was no one in the kitchen but myself and John. Henry and Sandy were at the barn. Mr. Freeland put his head in at the door and called me by name, saying there were some gentlemen at the door who wished to see me. I stepped to the door and inquired what they wanted. They at once seized me, and without giving me any satisfaction, tied me, lashing my hands closely together. I insisted upon knowing what the matter was. They at length said that they had learned I had been in a scrape, and that I was to be examined before my master, and if their information proved false, I should not be hurt. In a few moments they succeeded in tying John. They then turned to Henry, who had by this time returned, and commanded him to cross his hands. "I won't," said Henry, in a firm tone, indicating his readiness to meet the consequences of his refusal. "Won't you?" said Tom Graham, the constable. "No, I won't," said Henry, in a still stronger tone. With this, 2 of the constables pulled out their shining pistols, and swore by their Creator that they would make him cross his hands or kill him. Each cocked his pistol, and, with fingers on the trigger, walked up to Henry, saying at the same time if he did not cross his hands, they would blow his damn heart out. Shoot me," said Henry. "You can't kill me but once. Shoot, and be damned I won't be tied." This he said in a tone of loud defiance, and at the same time, with a motion as quick as lightning, he with one single stroke dashed the pistols from the hands of each constable. As he did this, all hands fell upon him, and after beating him some time, they finally overpowered him and got him tied. During the scuffle, I managed, I know not how, to get my pass out, and, without being discovered, put it into the fire. We were now tied, and just as we were to leave for Easton jail, Betsy Freeland, mother of William Freeland, came to the door with her hands full of biscuits, and divided them between Henry and John. She then delivered herself of a speech to the following effect. Addressing herself to me, she said, "You devil, you yellow devil, it was you that put it in the heads of Henry and John to run away. But for you, you long-legged mulatto devil, Henry nor John would never have thought of such a thing." I made no reply and was immediately hurried off towards St. Michael's. So somehow their plan was ratted out. She calls him a yellow devil. Remember, Frederick Douglass, he has a white father and a black mother. So his skin is like a lighter tone. And she says it's his fault. They wouldn't have thought of this on their own. Just a moment previous to the scuffle with Henry, Mr. Hamilton suggested the propriety of making a search for the protections which he had understood Frederick had written for himself and the rest. So he knows Douglas wrote a pass for them, and he says we need to search these people and find it. Douglas already burned his in the fire. But just at the moment he was about to carry his proposal into effect, his aid was needed in helping to tie Henry, and the excitement attending the scuffle caused them either to forget or to deem it unsafe under the circumstances to search. So we were not yet convicted of the intention to run away. When we got about halfway to St. Michael's, while the constables having us in charge were looking ahead, Henry inquired of me what he should do with his pass. I told him to eat it with his biscuit and own nothing. And we passed the word around, own nothing, and own nothing, said we all. If you own to nothing, you say nothing, and they're going to get rid of their passes by eating them. Our confidence in each other was unshaken. We were resolved to succeed or fail together after the calamity or disaster had befallen us as much as before. We were now prepared for anything. We were to be dragged that morning 15 miles behind horses and then to be placed in the Easton jail. When we reached St. Michael's, we underwent a sort of examination. We all denied that we ever intended to run away. We did this more to bring out the evidence against us than from any hope of getting clear of being sold. For as I have said, we were ready for that. The fact was, we cared but little where we went, so long as we went together. Our greatest concern was about separation. We dreaded that more than anything this side of death. So we see these close bonds that these men have formed with each other. The thing they dread most isn't being sold south, where slavery is so much worse, or being put in jail. They're afraid of being separated. We found the evidence against us to be the testimony of one person. Our master would not tell us who it was, but we came to a unanimous decision among ourselves as to who their informant was. We were sent off to the jail at Easton. When we got there, we were delivered up to the sheriff, Mr. Joseph Graham, and by him placed in jail. Henry, John, and myself were placed in one room together, Charles and Henry Bailey in another. Their object in separating us was to hinder concert. So to concert would be to talk and plan. So they want to separate them, so they have less communication with each other. And it says they've all decided that they know who the one person is who ratted them out, but we have not been told. We had been in jail scarcely 20 minutes when a swarm of slave traders and agents for slave traders flocked into jail to look at us and to ascertain if we were for sale. Such a set of beings I never saw before. I felt myself surrounded by so many fiends from perdition. A fiend is a monster, perdition is hell. So he just said these people are monsters from hell. A band of pirates never looked more like their father, the devil. They laughed and grinned over us, saying, "Ah, my boys, we've got you, haven't we?" And after taunting us in various ways, they one by one went into an examination of us with intent to ascertain our value. They would impudently ask us if we would not like to have them for our masters. We would make them no answer and leave them to find out as best they could. Then they would curse and swear at us, telling us that they could take the devil out of us in a very little while if we were only in their hands. While in jail, we found ourselves in much more comfortable quarters than we expected when we went there. We did not get much to eat, nor that which was very good, but we had a good clean room, from the windows of which we could see what was going on in the street, which was very much better than though we had been placed in one of the damp, dark cells. Upon the whole, we got along very well, so far as the jail and its keeper were concerned. Immediately after the holidays were over, contrary to our expectations, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Freeland came up to Easton and took Charles, the two Henrys, and John out of jail and carried them home, leaving me alone. So they weren't sold south, they're taken back home, but Douglas is left behind. I regarded this separation as a final one. It caused me more pain than anything else in the whole transaction. I was ready for anything rather than separation. I supposed that they had consulted together and had decided that, as I was the whole cause of the intention of the others to run away, it was hard to make the innocent suffer with the guilty, and that they had, therefore, concluded to take the others home and sell me as a warning to the others that remained. It is due to the noble Henry to say he seemed almost as reluctant at leaving the prison as at leaving home to come to the prison, but we knew he should, in all probability, be separated if we were sold, and since he was in their hands, he concluded to go peaceably home. I was now left to my fate. I was all alone, and within the walls of a stone prison, but a few days before, and I was full of hope. I expected to have been safe in a land of freedom, but now I was covered with gloom, sunk down in the utmost despair. I thought the possibility of freedom was gone. I was kept in this way about 1 week, at the end of which Captain Old, my master, to my surprise and utter astonishment, came up and took me out, and with the intention of sending me with a gentleman of his acquaintance into Alabama. So that would be further south, right, of Maryland, Alabama. But from some cause or other, he did not send me to Alabama, but concluded to send me back to Baltimore to live again with his brother Hugh and to learn a trade. So a very strange turn of events here. Remember, Douglas was with Covey for a year. Then he was being rented out to Mr. Freeland. And now he's going back to Baltimore to Old and Sophia being his wife, and the one who began to first teach him to read. Thus, after an absence of 3 years and 1 month, I was once more permitted to return to my old home in Baltimore. My master sent me away because there existed against me a very great prejudice in the community, and he feared I might be killed. So people are mad at Douglas because they think he was the one who was plotting and carrying out the plan to run away, or leading the plan. So his master says he has to send him away for his own safety. Now it says I was sent to learn a trade. Just like there's trade schools today, where people can learn trades like electrical, plumbing, that sort of thing. There were people with specialized trades back then, but there weren't necessarily schools. You just went and you apprenticed under an expert to learn your trade. In a few weeks after I went to Baltimore, Master Hugh hired me to Mr. William Gardner, an extensive shipbuilder on Fells Point. I was put there to learn how to caulk. Now, caulking. Caulk, they sell it in stores today. It usually comes in a long tube, and you put it in something called a caulk gun, which is just a device that helps you squeeze out the caulk. But caulk is, you seal up things with caulk. Maybe, I know we at home, we use it around our windows because our windows are older and they're drafty. So all along the edges, we caulk to keep that out. On ships, they would caulk to keep the ship watertight. Any cracks between wood, they would run caulk to keep the water out. So this is the expert that he's going to learn how to do the trade of caulking. It, however, proved to be a very unfavorable place for the accomplishment of this object. Mr. Gardner was engaged that spring in building 2 large man-of-war brigs, so really big ships for battle, professedly for the Mexican government. The vessels were to be launched in the July of that year, and in failure thereof, Mr. Gardner was to lose a considerable sum, so that when I entered, all was in a hurry. There was no time to learn anything. Every man had to do that which he knew how to do. So like there's this huge contract they have to fill, and there's not time to teach someone how to caulk. Everyone has to focus on getting this done in time. In entering the shipyard, my orders from Mr. Gardner were to do whatever the carpenters commanded me to do. This was placing me at the beck and call of about 75 men. I was to regard all these as masters. Their word was to be my law. My situation was a most trying one. At times I needed a dozen pair of hands. I was called a dozen ways in the space of a single minute. 3 or 4 voices would strike my ear at the same moment. It was, Fred, come help me to cant this timber here. Fred, come carry this timber yonder. Fred, bring that roller here. Fred, go get a fresh can of water. Fred, come help saw off the end of this timber. Fred, go quick and get the crowbar. Fred, hold on the end of this fall. Fred, go to the blacksmith shop and get a new punch. Hurrah, Fred, run and get me a cold chisel. I say, Fred, bear a hand and get up a fire as quick as lightning under that steam box. Hello, slave, come, turn this grindstone. Come, move, and bows this timber forward. I say, darky, blast your eyes, why don't you heat up some pitch? Hello. 3 voices at the same time. Come here, go there. Hold on, where are you? Damn you, if you move, I'll knock your brains out. That's a little stressful. This was my school for 8 months, and I might have remained there longer, but for a most horrid fight I had with 4 of the white apprentices, in which my left eye was nearly knocked out, and I was horribly mangled in all other respects. The facts of the case were these. Until a very little while after I went there, white and black ship carpenters worked side by side, and no one seemed to see any impropriety in it. Impropriety is like inappropriate to the social expectation, or we use the word taboo, something that's just not okay to say or do in public. White and black people working side by side, it never seemed to be a big deal. All hands seemed to be very well satisfied. Many of the black carpenters were free men. Things seemed to be going very well. All at once, the white carpenters knocked off and said they would not work with free colored workmen. Their reason for this, as alleged, was that if free colored carpenters were encouraged, they would soon take the trade into their own hands, and poor white men would be thrown out of employment. They, therefore, felt called upon to put a stop to it. So these white workers decide that they're going to go on strike. They're going to refuse to work. And their argument is these black people will steal our jobs. Probably just more they're racist, but that's their argument. They therefore, or excuse me, and taking advantage of Mr. Gardner's necessities, they broke off, swearing that they would work no longer unless he were discharged his black carpenters. Now remember, they have to get these two massive warships built by a certain deadline. So him losing his workers is a huge, huge problem. Now, though, this did not extend to me in form. It did reach me in fact. My fellow apprentices very soon began to feel it degrading to them to work with me. They began to put on airs and talk about the slaves taking the country, saying we all ought to be killed. And, being encouraged by the journeymen, they commenced making my condition as hard as they could by hectoring me around and sometimes striking me. So they're starting to abuse him now, verbally all the time, but now they're physically striking him. I, of course, kept the vow I made after the fight with Mr. Covey. Remember his vow. He said, the next person who succeeds in whipping me has to also succeed in killing me. So he's going to fight back. I struck back again, regardless of consequences, and while I kept them from combining, I succeeded very well, for I could whip the whole of them, taking them separately. They, however, at length combined and came upon me, armed with sticks, stones, and heavy handspikes. One came in front with a half brick. There was one on each side of me and one behind me. While I was attending to those in front and on either side, the one behind ran up with the handspike and struck me a heavy blow upon the head. It stunned me. I fell, and with this they all ran upon me and fell to beating me with their fists. I let them lay on for a while, gathering strength. In an instant, I gave a sudden surge and rose to my hands and knees. Just as I did that, one of their numbers gave me, with his heavy boots, a powerful kick in the left eye. The eyeball seemed to have burst. When they saw my eye closed and badly swollen, they left me. With this, I seized the handspike and for a time pursued them. But here the carpenters interfered, and I thought I might as well give it up. It was impossible to stand my hand against so many. All this took place in sight of not less than 50 white ship carpenters, and not one interposed a friendly word. But some cried, "Kill the damn slave! Kill him! Kill him! He struck a white person!" I found my only chance for life was in flight. I succeeded in getting away without an additional blow, and barely so, for to strike a white man is death by lynch law, and that was the law in Mr. Gardner's shipyard, nor is there much of any other out of Mr. Gardner's shipyard. So whether you're in the shipyard or out, he says to strike a white man is death by lynch law. Lynching is hanging. But the difference is lynching is where people just get really angry and a mob forms and they start chanting death to the person who has allegedly committed a crime. And they grab him, they round up a rope somewhere, and they throw it over a high tree limb, tie a noose around the man's neck, and hang him. There's no trial, there's no jury, there's no justice. It's just people reacting in a mob frenzy. I went directly home and told the story of my wrongs to Master Hugh, and I'm happy to say of him, irreligious as he was, his conduct was heavenly compared with that of his brother Thomas under similar circumstances. He listened attentively to my narration. So remember, his brother Thomas is who Douglas went to after Covey beat him. And that's when Thomas was like, you got to go back to him. Things are different when Hugh listens to Douglas's story. He listened attentively to my narration of the circumstances leading to the savage outrage and gave many proofs of his strong indignation of it. Indignation is anger over unfairness. So Hugh sees that what happened to Douglas was not right, and he's mad about it. The heart of my once overkind mistress was again melted into pity. My puffed out eye and blood-covered face moved her to tears. She took a chair by me, washed the blood from my face, and with a mother's tenderness bound up my head, covering the wounded eye with a lean piece of fresh beef. You've probably seen this maybe in movies, and maybe some of your parents even do this, but like a black eye, put raw meat on it. I don't exactly know why. I always thought just because it's cold, so it serves as a sort of ice pack, because you'd have it stored somewhere where it's cold, but I don't really know. So anyways, he's got meat over his swollen eye. It was almost compensation for my suffering to witness once more a manifestation of kindness from this, my once affectionate old mistress. Master Hugh was very much enraged. He gave expression to his feelings by pouring out curses upon the heads of those who did the deed. As soon as I got a little better of my bruises, he took me with him to Esquire Watson's on Bond Street to see what could be done about the matter. Mr. Watson inquired who saw the assault committed. Master Hugh told him it was done in Mr. Gardner's shipyard at midday, where there were a large company of men at work. As to that, he said, the deed was done and there was no question as to who did it. His answer was he could do nothing in the case unless some white man would come forward and testify. Remember, the word of a black person means nothing. Whether they're free or whether they're slave, they're black, so they cannot testify in a case. He could issue no warrant on my word. If I had been killed in the presence of 1,000 colored people, their testimony combined would have been insufficient to have arrested one of the murderers. Insufficient means not enough. So no one would get arrested, even if 1,000 black people saw it happen. Master Hugh, for once, was compelled to say this state of things was too bad. Of course, it was impossible to get any white man to volunteer his testimony in my behalf and against the white young men. Even those who may have sympathized with me were not prepared to do this. It required a degree of courage unknown to them to do so, for just at that time, the slightest manifestation or appearance of humanity toward a colored person was denounced as abolitionism, and that name subjected its bearer to frightful liabilities. So even if you slightly showed any kindness to a black person, people would say, "Oh, you're an abolitionist," and you would be hated, and you could get in big trouble for that. Kind of like nowadays, where people are so divided politically that if you even say one thing that people think hints at the other side, you get like attacked, right? Should I just say Facebook and social media? The watchwords of the bloody-minded in that region and in those days were "damn the abolitionists" and "damn the slaves." There was nothing done, and probably nothing would have been done if I had been killed. Such was and such remains the state of things in the Christian city of Baltimore. What do we have there? They're not really acting Christian, right? So, sarcastic tone, verbal irony. Master Hugh, finding he could get no redress, refused to let me go back again to Mr. Gardner. He cut me himself, and his wife dressed my wound till I was again restored to health. He then took me into the shipyard of which he was foreman in the employment of Mr. Walter Price. There I was immediately set to caulking, and very soon learned the art of using my mallet and iron. In the course of 1 year from the time I left Mr. Gardner's, I was able to command the highest wages given to the most experienced caulkers. I was now of some importance to my master. So he's learned the trade. He's a skilled worker now. I was bringing him from $6 to $7 per week. I sometimes brought him $9 per week. My wages were $1.50 a day. After learning how to caulk, I sought my own employment, made my own contracts, and collected the money which I earned. My pathway became much more smooth than before. My condition was now much more comfortable. When I could get no caulking to do, I did nothing. During these leisure times, those old notions about freedom would steal over me again. When in Mr. Gardner's employment, I was kept in such a perpetual whirl of excitement, I could think of nothing scarcely but my life. And in thinking of my life, I almost forgot my liberty. I have observed this in my experience of slavery, that whenever my condition was improved, instead of its increasing my contentment, it only increased my desire to be free and set me to thinking of plans to gain my freedom. I have found that to make a contented slave, it is necessary to make a thoughtless one. It is necessary to darken his moral and mental vision, and as far as possible to annihilate or destroy the power of reason. He must be able to detect no inconsistencies in slavery. He must be made to feel that slavery is right, and he can be brought to that only when he ceases to be a man. So to make someone be okay being a slave, you have to just break them down to not being able to think for themselves. I was getting, I was now getting, as I have said, $1.50 per day. I contracted for it. I earned it. It was paid to me. It was rightfully my own. Yet, upon each returning Sunday night, I was compelled to deliver every cent of that money to Master Hugh. And why? Not because he earned it, not because he had any hand in earning it, not because I owed it to him, nor because he possessed the slightest shadow of a right to it, but solely because he had the power to make me give it to him. The right of the grim-visaged pirate upon the high seas is exactly the same. Your visage is your face. So, and grim is like, if things are grim, they're just a really bad outlook, really bad looking. So a really grim-faced pirate out on the high seas where they're robbing ships and killing people is just like when Douglas has to give up the money every Sunday to Master Hugh. So we have a metaphor, right? Comparing two things that aren't really the same or connected, but just show that every week Douglas is being robbed of all his work, of all his time, all his money. But he has to. He can't refuse. He's a slave. And that is the end of that really long chapter, chapter 10. So thanks for sticking with it, and we'll see you next time for chapter 11.